Hello everyone, and welcome to Right Wing Rising. Please be sure to like this video down below before you are finished watching, and subscribe to the channel if you are new. So in today's installment of my 240 to Win series, we have to talk about the former swing state of Missouri. Now, it might be hard for many people to believe that it was once a battleground and not a Republican state like it reliably is today in most cases. George H.W. Bush barely won it, even in a landslide victory in the 1988 presidential election. Bill Clinton won it twice in 92 and 96. George W. Bush won it in 2000 by just 3.5 points and doubled that margin for a 7-point victory in 2004. Then, in 2008, Barack Obama came within 4,000 votes from making it blue. With the popular vote in 2012 getting less Democratic than it was in 2008, Missouri swung back in the Republican direction, voting for Romney by a 9-point margin, giving him a victory that was 2 points bigger than when Bush won it in 2004. But then, in 2016, Trump won it by almost 19 points, marking the second straight election cycle where Missouri trended nearly 10 points in the Republican direction at the presidential level, solidifying itself as a red state since Missouri had been trending slowly but surely to the right since the turn of the century. The state did bounce back in the Democratic direction in 2020, voting for Trump by 15.5 points, a 3-point dip compared to 2016. Although this is basically negligible because the country as a whole shifted to the left by the same amount as Missouri did in 2020. And Trump actually got a 0.5% higher of the vote share than he did in 2016 and gained 100,000 new voters. Biden improved 3.5 points over Clinton's performance, but that was mostly from a decreased third party and once again, the leftward shift of the national popular vote. It is pretty obvious why this state has become Republican in recent years. Almost 80% of Missouri's population is white, and almost 80% of the population is also Christian. There are 90,000 farms in Missouri that take up about 2/3 of state land, and the manufacturing sector employs about 10% of state workers. So there's a plethora of demographics that are favorable to Republicans that conservatives can target come election time to get out and support them. So there is actually room to even improve in the state for Donald Trump this year, not regress. If Trump can maximize his vote total in the rural areas and among the working class demographic, and also flip Boone County red, which is the only county that is blue in the center of Missouri, while also at the same time narrowing his margin of defeat to Kamala Harris in Jackson County on the western side of the state and in the St. Louis metro area on the eastern side of the state. If he can do all of those things in Missouri, it is possible that he gets 60% of the vote, or at least a 20-point victory. Before Biden dropped out of the race, Trump led Kamala Harris in the polls in Missouri by 13 and 18 points in 2 different polls. In 3 polls that have been conducted recently, Trump only leads Kamala Harris by about 10 points, give or take. But I would completely disregard those polls because they are not trustworthy. Trump only led in the polls in 2020 against Joe Biden by around 7 to 8 points in Missouri, with many news outlets still expecting this state to be somewhat competitive, which was head-scratching. Trump ended up with a margin of victory double of what the polls were predicting. So I expect Trump to improve in the state just as I expect him to improve in most, if not all, of the Midwest, and once again double the margin of victory that is expected of him from the polls and win by closer to 20 points. The only other Senate seat currently held by Republicans up for election this year that Democrats are seriously targeting, besides Texas and Florida, can actually be found in Missouri. All other Republican-held Senate seats up for re-election this year are in very safe Republican states. But the exceptional senator from Missouri, Josh Hawley, is up for re-election and is running for a second term. He flipped the Senate seat back into GOP hands in 2018 against the then incumbent Claire McCaskill by 6 points. He was outspent by her almost 5-1, but pulled ahead in polling ahead of Election Day and won by larger than expected. Josh Hawley's opponent this time is Lucas Kunce. He ran unsuccessfully for the Democratic nomination for the other U.S. Senate seat from Missouri in 2022, but he was able to politically bounce back 2 years later and successfully lock up the Democratic nomination for the Senate seat up for election this fall. He served in the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, is still in the Marine Reserves, and is also an attorney by profession. He is running as a moderate Democrat to be the common sense replacement for the people of Missouri against the quote-unquote controversial Josh Hawley. But that is the most ridiculous farce I have actually ever seen, because he is an extremely left progressive. He supports and has advocated for codifying access to abortion into the Constitution and federal law, removing the Senate filibuster, federalizing elections, and taking the power to run them away from the states and local areas. He has backed Medicare for all and a universal health care system. He would vote for gun control under the guise of red flag laws, and he is completely okay with sex change surgeries for children. He has also criticized the war on drugs and has attended pride parades in all major Missouri cities. He would be a complete disaster in the Senate, let alone from a red state like Missouri. But because he's a Democrat, he can hold all of these beliefs openly, but be called a moderate by the mainstream media. Meanwhile, any Republican slightly to the right of the woke culture being pushed by this current administration, academia, and all major institutions in this country are labeled far-right conservatives. It is complete gaslighting to the highest degree. Meanwhile, Josh Hawley has been absolutely terrific on all of the issues. He has supported term limits and reforming election campaign finance laws to reduce graft and corruption in politics. He is a nationalist who has a strong record on immigration and the border. He has been outspoken on human trafficking before it was being talked about, and is a non-interventionist who has voted against sending foreign aid packages endlessly to Ukraine, and is also a proponent of limiting the size and power of the federal government and reining in big tech. He backs the populist policies of Donald Trump on trade, tariffs, and bringing back manufacturing, working-class jobs from overseas, while also being an outspoken Christian on moral issues facing society, a strong cultural conservative on the pro-life issue, and against the LGBTQ agenda, going so far as to speak frequently at conferences about manhood and the sanctity of marriage, and use the power of his office to go after pornographic companies. He is an absolutely phenomenal senator, very underrated in my opinion, and I think that an argument could be made that he is not just one of the best, but actually the best conservative senator that we have in office right now in America. He represents his state well and the conservative values of the majority of the residents of that state, and definitely deserves a second term. He has raised double the amount that his liberal Democrat opponent has, who has still fundraised about $10 million, which is not insignificant for a challenger to an incumbent senator. So he's still being well propped up by the Democrats, but Josh Hawley still got 200,000 more votes in the primary than all Democratic candidates did combined, while also leading all polls that have been conducted of this race, both from last year and this year. But some recent polls have actually showed a tightening race, with him being only up by as little as 4 to 5 points in some polls. But while I do expect Hawley to underrun Trump by a little bit, since Democrats will be spending more money on the Senate race than they will be at the presidential level in Missouri, I still confidently predict that this will be a major polling miss in favor of the Democrats, and that Trump and Hawley will both win by comfortable margins on Election Day. I think Hawley is slated to win by definitely around 15 points, if not greater than that. Again, I think he will underperform Trump by a little bit, but not by that much. But either way, I think he's in good shape, and is on track to win a second term fairly easily. But given how much money Democrats are pouring into this race, this is still a race to pay somewhat attention to on election night to see how the race goes for Hawley. As far as other down-ballot races go in Missouri, the only somewhat competitive House race can be found in the St. Louis metro area, a heavily suburban and very wealthy region, and that is the 2nd Congressional District, where the incumbent Republican Ann Wagner won by only 4 points and 15,000 votes in 2018, and 6.5 points and 30,000 votes in 2020, so pretty narrow margins overall. But she won by 12 points in 2022 since this seat got redder in redistricting. It went from a seat that Trump barely won by the skin of his teeth, literally 0.02% against Biden in 2020. Now it's a seat that he won by 8 points. So look for Wagner to probably win this seat by at least 10, given her margin in the midterms, but she could win by as much as 15 points if Trump improves by a few points around and in the St. Louis area. She outran Trump by 10 in 2016 and by 6 points in 2020, so she tends to outperform him. Given that her seat is now a Trump plus 8 district, history would point to her having a good shot to outperform Trump by at least 5 points and get to a 15-point comfortable margin of victory. But still, since historically this seat has been close, and it's in the St. Louis area, the most Democratic area in the state, it is still one of the few races in Missouri to keep an eye on election night when the results come in from that state, because it is not impossible that this race could be within 10 or closer than expected. As for Wagner herself, she's really not the best Republican, being pretty meh on all of the issues. She is considered part of the moderate wing of the Republican Party, and is really not the most socially conservative individual, unfortunately. That being said, she doesn't buck the party on most important votes in the House, so she's not normally a problem killing good legislation from passing. She's not the biggest rhino, but we could still do a lot better than her for Republican representation, so she definitely should be a target for a primary challenge in 2026. Especially since she only won 65% of the primary vote as the incumbent against a no-name challenger this year. If she actually was posed with a well-funded challenger, there might be a good shot at primarying her out. If Ann Wagner does hold on for another term in her seat, as is expected, Republicans will maintain their 6-2 House delegation majority. In the state legislature, Republicans hold advantages in both branches. They hold a 24-10 supermajority in the state Senate, and they only need to hold on to one competitive red seat in the greater St. Louis area to maintain that current majority. All of the 23 other Republican state Senate seats should be pretty easy to hold on to, so there's no risk of losing that supermajority. And in the state House, Republicans have a 111-52 seat majority, which is also a supermajority, by just 2 seats. Republicans have about 10 of their districts that are competitive, so they will at least need to hold 8 of those seats to keep their supermajority in the House as well. But Democrats also are having to protect about 10 of their own seats that are competitive, and that Republicans could pick up to either help hold their supermajority or even expand it. And if Trump does well and improves from his 2020 margin, that could go a long way down ballot in protecting and expanding upon the current legislative advantages for Republicans in Missouri. And at the statewide level, Republican voters are getting more conservative representation. In addition to having arguably the best United States Senate delegation in Eric Schmidt and Josh Hawley, many conservatives won primaries to be the Republican nominees for statewide offices in the state government. The lone exception being for the governorship, unfortunately. The current incumbent governor, Mike Parson, is being replaced by the lieutenant governor, Mike Kehoe, who won the nomination against a more conservative challenger, State Senator Billy Eigel. Both the current governor, Mike Parson, and the lieutenant governor, Mike Kehoe, are both unexceptional establishment Republicans. So it's neither a downgrade or an upgrade in that seat. But everywhere else was massive upgrades. In the lieutenant governorship, to replace Kehoe, David Wassinger, a conservative political outsider who has never been elected to anything, is definitely a big improvement over the career politician currently holding that office. The very solid Attorney General Andrew Bailey got renominated, who has had a very solid record in just 2 short years in office. The completely useless incumbent Secretary of State Jay Ashcroft retired to run for governor unsuccessfully. The new Republican nominee for that office is Denny Hoskins, an election integrity hawk who is much more conservative and less establishment. So Republicans will see upgrades in the Lieutenant Governor and Secretary of State offices and keep their very solid Attorney General. All of these statewide offices, including the governorship, should go Republican by at least 15 points. Mike Parson, as the incumbent governor, won re-election in 2020 by about 17 points, outrunning Donald Trump on the ballot by a point or two. So look for the Republican nominees for these 4 statewide offices in Missouri to win by about the mark that Donald Trump will, giving or taking a few points depending on the race we're talking about. And besides the statewide offices, conservatives will also be getting better representation in Congress from Missouri. The current incumbent of that seat, a run-of-the-mill establishment Republican, is being replaced by Bob Onder, who got the Trump endorsement and is also backed by the House Freedom Caucus. He's very conservative and beat out a terrible rhino candidate in the primary in this safe red seat. So that's also a very positive development in Missouri. So the state is not just trending electorally to the right, but you're also seeing more conservative politicians being elected in the state of Missouri, which will go a long way in making the legislation, the policies, and the culture in the state more conservative as a whole, as a result of their governing agenda. Missouri is also currently one of the roughly 15 states that has banned abortion within its borders, distinguishing it as one of the most socially conservative states as well in the country. However, that is in jeopardy as a measure has made it onto the ballot this fall, that being Amendment 3, that would amend the Constitution to make a right for abortion in the state constitution, effectively repealing the abortion ban in the state, and it would hamstring conservatives from any meaningful implementation on any abortion restrictions, as it has no or very vague safeguards against late-term abortion. And unfortunately, this amendment is up in the polls. In February, the yes vote for the amendment was at 44%. In August, it was at 52%. And now in a poll from September, it is at 58%. That is not good for the pro-life movement. As usual, something that has become commonplace since Roe v. Wade was overturned in 2022, the pro-abortion movement is outflanking the pro-life movement constantly. And this is another case. The pro-abortion movement is very well funded, is very proactive, and doesn't sleep. And the pro-life movement has struggled to counteract the movements of the pro-abortion side of things, which is not helped by the media giving pro-lifers constant negative press and making the issue of abortion seem sympathetic constantly in favor of the pro-abortion movement. Even sadder, all Democrats are pretty much united in being very, very sickly in favor of abortion, like it's some awesomely great thing, while not all Republicans are in lockstep about abortion, seeing it as wrong. Some are much more squishy on the issue, allowing for some crossover vote, which unfortunately favors the passage of this amendment. If anywhere from 15 to 20% of Trump voters cross over and also vote yes on this amendment, it will pass. That seems like a very high number of Republicans voting for the amendment, and you would be correct in thinking so. So I really hope that many do not fall for this and vote to legalize abortion in Missouri after it had triumphantly been banned. And it took decades to make that possible in states. So I hope it does not get undone after merely 2 years. This is a big moment for Missouri. Like I said, electorally, the state is trending very conservative. Republicans have control of all statewide offices, and they have majorities in the House delegation and in both branches of the legislature. And more conservatives are being elected to all political positions in the state. Additionally, laws now being on the books to protect the life of the unborn child, the policies and laws and culture of the state are moving in a conservative direction. Conservatives in the state, Republicans in the state, need to realize that the vote on this amendment is an inflection point for the state's future. Josh Hawley and Lieutenant Governor / likely next governor Mike Kehoe are both openly opposing this amendment. And even though I do think he's pretty establishment, I do give props to Kehoe for openly coming out and strongly opposing this amendment. If elected statewide Republicans running for re-election and the pro-life movement can rally conservatives and Republican voters to not support this amendment and to make it fail, no matter how narrowly, that would be a hugely positive thing for the future of this state. Of all the elections in Missouri this year, this is the biggest. It has the most consequence. It is not likely that Republicans lose any office in this state that they currently hold on to. It's more of a matter of watching what the margin is, to look at the direction of the political future of the state, to see if it keeps trending conservative. And it also matters because how big Republicans win up and down the ballot will likely affect the outcome of this amendment. Because no matter how many Republicans get elected, if this amendment passes, it will be a bittersweet election night for Republicans in the state of Missouri.